She wasn't on the guest list. That alone should have been enough to keep her out. The royal ball was not the kind of place one simply wandered into. It was an event of precision, names inked carefully onto parchment weeks in advance, each invitation sealed with wax and delivered under watchful eyes. Every guest had a title, a lineage, a history that could be traced through generations. Every presence in that grand hall was accounted for, except hers. No one saw her arrive. No carriage was announced. No servant spoke her name. No noble turned to greet her at the entrance. And yet somehow she was already there, moving quietly beneath the glow of chandeliers, blending into a sea of silk and jewels as though she had always belonged. Her gown was not the most extravagant, nor the brightest, nor the most adorned. It did not scream for attention the way others did. It whispered instead. A deep shade of midnight blue, like the sky just before darkness fully takes hold. It flowed around her with a quiet elegance, untouched by excess. No heavy embroidery, no glittering display of wealth. Just grace, refined, deliberate, and dangerously understated. Her face, however, was hidden, a mask, delicate, intricate, designed with just enough detail to draw the eye, yet enough restraint to conceal more than it revealed. It framed her features without exposing them, casting soft shadows across her eyes. You could not see her clearly, but that was precisely what made it impossible to look away. And still, no one knew her name. At first, it didn't matter. The music was too loud, the laughter too constant, the politics too thick in the air. Nobles moved in circles, exchanging pleasantries that meant nothing and everything at the same time. Smiles were given, alliances were hinted at, rivalries masked beneath polite conversation. It was a night of performance, where every glance carried weight and every word had intention. People noticed beauty, of course. They always did. But beauty alone was not enough to disrupt the rhythm of such a gathering. And yet, something about her did. It wasn't immediate. It began as a subtle shift. A glance held for a second too long. A conversation that faltered mid-sentence. A quiet curiosity that moved from one person to another like a ripple across still water. Who is she? The question was soft at first, almost careless. But no one had an answer. She did not behave like the others. That was the first thing they noticed. She wasn't searching the room for powerful eyes to meet. She wasn't adjusting her posture every time a noble passed. She wasn't laughing too loudly or speaking too carefully. She moved with a calm that felt out of place, as though she had stepped into a world that did not define her, and that made people uneasy. Because in a room where everyone was trying to be seen, she was the only one who seemed perfectly content being unknown, and somehow that made her impossible to ignore. Across the grand hall, standing apart from the crowd as he always did, was the Duke. He had no need to move. The world moved around him. Conversations shifted when he entered a room. Eyes followed him, even when he did nothing at all. His presence was not loud, but it was undeniable, like a storm that did not need thunder to be feared. He was not a man easily impressed. In fact, nothing about the evening had captured his interest. Not the carefully arranged alliances, not the rehearsed charm of noble daughters. Not even the music that filled the hall with artificial warmth. He had attended out of obligation. Nothing more, until, without warning, his attention shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden realization, no visible change that others could immediately point to. It was quieter than that, more instinct than thought. His gaze moved. And then it stopped, on her. For a moment he did not understand why. She was not surrounded by admirers. She was not drawing attention in any obvious way. She was simply there. And yet the longer he looked, the more everything else seemed to fade. The conversations around him blurred into meaningless noise. The laughter became distant. The glittering room, once overwhelming, lost its hold. There was only her, a stranger, a mystery, a presence that did not belong. And yet fit too perfectly into the space she occupied. His expression did not change, but something beneath it did, a flicker of curiosity, sharp, unfamiliar, dangerous. He had spent years mastering control, over himself, over others, over every situation placed before him. He understood people. Understood their motives, their ambitions, their weaknesses. Nothing surprised him anymore, and yet this did, because he could not place her, could not read her. Could not understand why she, out of everyone in that room, had become the only thing he could focus on. It made no sense. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. Around her, the whispers grew louder. Have you seen her before? No. Which family does she belong to? I don't recognize the crest if she has one at all. Then how is she here? No one approached her directly, not at first. Curiosity in such circles was always cautious. People observed before they acted. judged before they engaged. But she did not seem to notice, or perhaps she simply did not care. She moved through the hall with quiet confidence, her posture relaxed, her steps unhurried. She paused occasionally, never for long, acknowledging conversations without inviting them. A nod here, a brief smile there, enough to be polite but never enough to be known. It was deliberate, everything about her was deliberate. And that was what made it impossible for him to look away. The Duke watched, longer than he should have. Longer than he ever allowed himself to. There was something in the way she carried herself, something that did not align with the world around her. She was not playing the same game, not following the same rules. It intrigued him. No, more than that, it pulled him in. He didn't realize he had begun moving until he was already halfway across the room. Conversations shifted as he passed. Heads turned. Whispers followed, but he ignored all of it. His focus never wavered. She hadn't noticed him yet. Or perhaps she had and chose not to show it. Either way, the distance between them closed slowly, inevitably, and then she turned, not suddenly, not startled, just enough to meet his gaze. For a single moment the world stilled. There were no whispers now. No music, no movement, just silence. And in that silence, something passed between them, unspoken, unclear, but undeniable. He had faced kings without hesitation. Negotiated with men twice his age and power without a second thought. He had never been the one to pause, never the one to question. But now, standing before a woman whose name he did not know, whose face he could not fully see, he felt it, that rare, dangerous feeling, the loss of certainty. And still, he did not look away, neither did she. It was brief, barely a moment, but it was enough. Because from that point on, everything had changed. The night continued, the music played. The nobles laughed, danced, and pretended nothing was different. But something was, he knew it, even if no one else did. Because no matter where he stood, no matter who spoke to him, no matter what demands were placed on his attention, his eyes always found her again. And each time it became harder to understand why. By midnight she was gone, no farewell, no announcement, no trace, just absence. As if she had never been there at all. But the Duke knew better. Because for the first time in years he had seen something he could not explain. And now that it has disappeared, he could not ignore it. I could not forget it, could not let it go. And somewhere, deep beneath the control he had built so carefully over the years, something darker began to form, not curiosity, not interested, something far more dangerous. Because this was no longer about a woman at a ball. This was about a mystery that had slipped through his grasp. And the Duke was not a man who tolerated loose ends. He didn't yet know who she was, didn't know where she had gone, didn't know why she had been there. But one thing was certain, he would find out, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Because the moment she walked into that ballroom, she became the one thing he could not control. And that was something he would never allow. He would search every name, question every servant, uncover every secret hidden beneath the polished surface of the court. He would tear through lies, dismantle silence, and follow every whisper until it led him to the truth, to her. Because somewhere out there she was still hiding, still unknown, still believing she had disappeared without consequence. But she was wrong. Terribly wrong, because the one man she had caught the attention of was not a man who forgot, not a man who moved on, not a man who accepted mystery without resolution. And if it meant unraveling the very world around him, if it meant exposing secrets better left buried, if it meant burning through every layer of deception that stood between him and the truth, then so be it. Because now, he wasn't just curious, he wasn't just intrigued, he was determined. And when the Duke became determined, there was no escaping him, not for anyone, not even for a woman with no name, not even for a ghost who vanished at midnight, and certainly not for the one person who had managed to do the impossible, to step into his world, disrupt it, and disappear, as though she had never been there at all. If you like this and still want to be LISDNING, 2 such interesting royal stories on the channel, dark royal stories, don't forget to like, share, comment, and most immediately subscribe to my channel, and click the bell for more update. The palace shimmered like 1,000 diamonds under the golden glow of the chandeliers. Every corner, every hall, every inch of the grand ballroom was steeped in elegance. The air was thick with the sweet perfume of roses, mingling with the faint scent of freshly baked delicacies that lined the long tables at the far end. Silk gowns swept the marble floors, their skirts rustling as noblewomen moved with practiced grace, their faces adorned with pearls and diamonds that glistened with every step. The music, soft, flowing, enveloped the room like a warm embrace, guiding the guests through the ritualistic steps of the evening's dance. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings, mingling with the subtle hum of whispered conversations, each one a delicate dance of power, flirtation, and veiled intentions. Each noble family had gathered here with one purpose: to make themselves known, to leave their mark, to secure their place within the ever-shifting tides of the court. But amid the grandeur, one man stood apart. The Duke of Blackwood, cold, untouchable. Fierce, his tall, imposing figure was draped in a tailored black suit that spoke of wealth and restraint, the kind of wealth that was earned over generations, not flaunted. His face, sharp and angular, carried the weight of untold secrets, and his eyes, deep, calculating, missed nothing. He was not here to play games with the other nobles, to indulge in the trivialities of social performance. He did not care for the glittering gowns or the polished smiles. He was above it all. He had always been. No woman had ever truly caught his interest, not the daughters of the most powerful families, their beauty a weapon as sharp as any sword. Not the foreign princesses, their exotic allure is a tempting distraction. Not the young debutantes who dance their way through the night, hopping to catch the eye of the right suitor. He had seen them all, and he had passed over them all with nothing more than a cursory glance. But tonight something was different. His gaze, as always, swept across the ballroom, studying the people around him with a practiced air of indifference. But then his eyes froze. At the far side of the room, a figure appeared, silent, moving with an air of quiet confidence that immediately set her apart from the rest. She was dressed in deep midnight blue, the color so dark it almost seemed to swallow the light around her. The gown was simple in its elegance, no extravagant embellishments, no eye-catching displays of wealth, just pure grace. It flowed around her like liquid, hugging her form in the most subtle way, making her seem like she was part of the shadows themselves. Her face was hidden behind a delicate mask, the kind of mask that suggested mystery rather than concealment, a piece of art rather than a simple disguise. For a moment, the Duke felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite place, a tug of curiosity, perhaps, a spark of something unexpected. But he ignored it, as he had ignored everything else in this world that didn't fit his carefully curated existence. She moved through the crowd like she didn't belong, as though the power and the wealth surrounding her had no real meaning. She didn't hesitate when she passed by a group of nobles exchanging polite words. She didn't pause to entertain the meaningless pleasantries that everyone else seemed to be so caught up in. She simply moved, her steps graceful and effortless, as though she were above it all. Her presence was quiet, almost unassuming, but there was a pull to her, a quiet magnetism that seemed to command attention without her lifting a finger. And that, for the first time in years, caught the Duke's attention. He stood rooted to the spot for a heartbeat, his mind whirling in confusion. He wasn't used to being caught off guard. He was the Duke, after all. Men like him were never thrown off course. And yet, this woman, this stranger, this enigma, had done just that. She didn't fit the mold of any woman he had ever seen before. No flirty glances, no coy smiles, no desperate attempts to win his favor. She was different. She was something else entirely. The guests around him continued to dance, to talk, to pretend as if nothing were out of the ordinary, but he could no longer focus on them. His eyes were locked on her, his every thought consumed by the question of who she was. He didn't understand it, but he needed to know. His gaze followed her as she moved through the crowd, her every movement impossibly smooth, as though the very space around her bent to her will. She passed a group of men, and one of them, clearly struck by her beauty, made a bold attempt to catch her attention. But she didn't look at him. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. Her eyes, those eyes hidden behind the mask, remained focused ahead, as though she were walking through a world that no one else could see, a world where she was the only thing that mattered. And still, the Duke couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something about the way she held herself. A quiet confidence, a self-possession that radiated from her with every step she took. She wasn't the typical noblewoman. Her presence wasn't loud or ostentatious. It was understated, but it was commanding. In a room full of people desperately trying to be seen, she remained a mystery, an enigma that called to him in a way no one ever had. He felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, something that both intrigued and unnerved him. Was it fascination? Desire? No, it was something far more dangerous. It was the pull of a puzzle, a riddle that needed solving. And the Duke of Blackwood never left a riddle unsolved, but he did nothing to reveal his interest. He remained still, watching her from a distance, his eyes following her as she made her way toward the far side of the ballroom, toward the shadowy corners where the light of the chandeliers didn't quite reach. She seemed to glide through the room, a ghost, a shadow in the midst of this opulent world. For a moment, he thought she might disappear entirely, melt into the walls like a dream fading into the morning light. But she didn't. She stopped near the edge of the room, her eyes scanning the crowd, calm, unbothered, as if the ballroom held no particular importance to her. The sight only deepened his fascination. The Duke moved then, almost imperceptibly, his steps measured, his mind already at work, piecing together the puzzle that was this mysterious woman. But he did not approach her directly. No, he wasn't foolish enough to do that. He didn't need to speak with her to learn about her. In this room, he had all the information he needed without ever saying a word. As the night wore on, the atmosphere of the ball shifted, the energy growing more charged. Couples swirled through the dance floor, their movements becoming more intense, the music swelling, creating a sense of urgency in the air. But no matter how many women caught his eye, no matter how many times someone tried to engage him in conversation, the Duke's gaze was always drawn back to her. She remained on the edge of the crowd, silent, still, as if she were watching the entire spectacle unfold for her own amusement. She didn't need to be the center of attention. She didn't need to prove anything. She simply existed in the space, more present than anyone else, even though she was unnoticed by most. By the time the clock struck midnight, the ball was in full swing, the guests swept up in their own desires, their own plans. But the Duke, for all his experience in the art of control, found himself lost in the mystery of this woman. He watched as she slipped away into the shadows, unnoticed by most, her departure as quiet as her arrival. The room seemed to exhale a collective breath, as though the night had reached its natural conclusion. But for the Duke, it had only just begun. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she had come from or who she was. But one thing was certain, he would find out. Because this was no longer just about a woman at a ball. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about the loss of control, and he would do anything to regain it. He crossed the room without hesitation. It was not a rushed movement, nor was it slow. It was deliberate, each step measured, controlled, carrying the quiet authority of a man who had never once questioned his own path. Conversations softened as he passed, like waves retreating from the shore. Eyes followed him, drawn not only by his presence but by the rare shift in his direction. The Duke of Blackwood did not move without purpose, and tonight his purpose had become her. Whispers began before he was even halfway across the ballroom. Who is she? I've never seen her before. Is he going to her? Do you think he knows her? No, if he did, we would all know. The murmurs spread quickly, slipping through the crowd like a quiet storm. Fans paused mid-motion, glasses hovered just before lips, and even the musicians seemed to falter for the briefest second, as though the air itself had tightened. Because this was not normal. The Duke did not approach women. Women approached him. And even then, they rarely succeeded in capturing more than a passing glance. But now, he was walking toward someone no one could name. She stood near the edge of the ballroom, just beyond the brightest glow of the chandeliers, where shadows softened the sharpness of reality. The light touched her gently, tracing the curve of her shoulders, gliding along the folds of her midnight gown. She had not moved much since he first noticed her. There was no urgency in her presence, no need to prove she belonged. And perhaps that was exactly why she stood out so vividly. As he drew closer, her stillness shifted, not dramatically, just enough. Her head turned slightly as though she had felt him before she saw him. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, and for the first time their eyes met without distance. There it was again, that silence, not the absence of sound, but something deeper. A quiet that existed only between them, cutting through the noise of the ballroom like a blade. He stopped in front of her. Close enough now to see the fine detail of her mask, the delicate craftsmanship that framed her face. Close enough to notice the calm in her breathing, the steadiness in her posture. She did not step back. She did not lower her gaze. She simply looked at him, and waited for a brief moment. Neither of them spoke. It was not awkward. It was not uncertain. It was intentional, as though both understood that whatever came next would matter. Finally, he broke the silence. "You're not from any house I know," he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, carrying the weight of quiet authority. It was not a question. It was a statement, a subtle assertion of his knowledge, his reach, his awareness of the world around him. A lesser woman might have been intimidated, might have stumbled under the pressure of his gaze, might have rushed to explain herself, to justify her presence. But she did none of those things. Instead, She smiled. It was faint, barely visible beneath the mask, but undeniable in its presence. A smile not of nervousness nor of submission, but of something far more intriguing, amusement. And yet here I am. Her voice was soft but steady, calm, unshaken. The words lingered between them, carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. There was no apology in them, no fear, no explanation, just the truth, and that caught him off guard. Not outwardly, his expression remained unchanged, his posture as composed as ever. But inside, something shifted. Something unfamiliar pressed against the edges of his control, bold. That was the first thought that formed, different, that followed quickly after, dangerous. That was the one that stayed. Because she was not reacting to him the way others did. She was not impressed, not intimidated, not eager. She met him as an equal. And that was something he had not experienced in a very long time. For a brief second, he considered leaving, turning away, dismissing the moment before it could take root. That was what he would have done before, what he should have done. But he didn't. Instead, he extended his hand. It was a simple gesture, one that carried centuries of meaning within these walls, an invitation, a command, a test. Around them, the whispers grew louder. He asking her to dance. She can't refuse. Who is she to accept? All eyes were on them now. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. And still, she did not move, not immediately. Her gaze dropped briefly to his hand as though weighing something unseen. Not fear, no doubt, decision. It was subtle, but he noticed. Of course he did. Everything about her demanded to be noticed. For a heartbeat, the moment stretched, suspended between action and refusal. And then she placed her hand in his. The contact was light, controlled. But it sent something sharp and unexpected through him. Not discomfort, not irritation, something else. Something he did not immediately understand. He closed his fingers around hers, firm but not forceful, and without another word, he led her toward the center of the ballroom. The music shifted, the tempo softened. As if the room itself had adjusted to accommodate them, they stepped into the dance. At first, it was nothing unusual. A standard movement, a practiced rhythm, steps he had performed countless times before with partners whose names he barely remembered. But this was different. She matched him effortlessly. Every movement precise, every turn seamless, as though she had known the dance long before this moment. There was no hesitation, no misstep, no need for correction. She moved in with him, not behind, not ahead with him. And that was new. The space between them was close but not improper. His hand rested lightly at her waist, her steady in his. Their movements were synchronized, fluid, almost natural. But it wasn't the dance that held his attention. It was her. The way she didn't look away. The way her gaze remained steady, unbroken by the expectations of the room. The way she carried herself, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who did not need it. The world around them began to blur. The music softened into something distant. The chatter faded into nothing more than background noise. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. But then, it was undeniable. For the first time in years, the Duke felt something unfamiliar, not control. Not strategy, not calculation, something else, something quieter, peace. It came without warning, without permission. A strange stillness settled within him, as though the constant tension he carried, the weight of responsibility, of power, of expectation, had for just a moment lifted. He did not understand it. And yet he did not resist it. Curiosity followed quickly after, sharp. Insistent. Who was she? How had she entered this world so effortlessly, without a trace? Why did she feel so out of place, and yet so perfectly aligned with him at this moment? Every answer he sought only led to more questions. And still, he could not look away. Then came the final realization, the most dangerous one of all, desire. Not the shallow, fleeting kind he had dismissed so easily in others. No, this was deeper, quieter, more dangerous. It wasn't just about her beauty, though that alone would have been enough to draw attention. It was about her presence, her mystery. The way she existed just beyond his understanding. And the more he danced with her, the more he realized something unsettling. He did not want the dance to end. She felt it too, not in the same way, perhaps not with the same intensity, but there was a shift in her as well. A subtle tightening of her fingers, a slight change in her breathing. For the first time since he had approached her, she seemed aware of the weight of the moment, the danger of it, because this was not just a dance. This was a line being crossed, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. The music began to slow. The final notes approaching, reality pressing back in the world waiting to reclaim them. But for one last moment, they remained suspended, between strangers and something more, between mystery and understanding, between control and the loss of it. And as the music came to an end, as the final step was taken, as their hands slowly separated, one thing became painfully clear. This was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. And then she was gone, not slowly, not in a way anyone could follow. One moment she was there, her presence still lingering in the air like the final note of a song not yet ready to end. And the next, nothing, no farewell, no name, no trace. It did not make sense. The Duke stood still for a fraction of a second after the dance ended, his hand still half raised, as though the warmth of her touch had not yet faded. The music softened around him, the applause of nearby guests blending into a distant echo, but he did not hear it, not fully. Because something was wrong, he turned. She should have been there, just a step away, just within reach. But she wasn't. His eyes moved quickly across the ballroom, sharp and precise, scanning faces, silhouettes, movements. Women in silk gowns, men in polished coats. Laughter, conversations, motion, but not her, not the midnight blue, not the mask. Not the calm, steady presence that had, only moments ago, anchored his entire world. A flicker of irritation crossed his expression, then confusion, then something darker. He stepped forward once, twice, his pace quickened, not enough to draw attention but enough to reveal urgency beneath his composed exterior. He moved through the crowd, his gaze narrowing, his focus cutting through distractions with ruthless precision. She could not have gone far, not this time, not without being seen. He reached the spot where she had stood last, where her presence had felt undeniable, almost tangible. But now it was empty, a hollow space where something important had been. The air felt different there, colder, as though whatever warmth she had carried with her had vanished the moment she did. He turned sharply, his eyes locking onto a nearby servant. He said, his voice low but commanding. The young man stiffened immediately, nearly dropping the tray he carried. "Why, Your Grace?" The woman who stood here, the Duke said, each word deliberate. "Where did she go?" The servant blinked, confused. "I am not sure, Your Grace." Sure, the words landed wrong, heavy, unacceptable. The Duke's gaze hardened just slightly. "You were standing here," he pressed. "You saw her." Servant swallowed. There were many guests, Your Grace. I didn't." "Look again." Wasn't louder. It didn't need to be. The weight behind those two words was enough to silence any excuse. The servant glanced nervously around the room, as though the answer might suddenly appear if he looked hard enough. But it didn't. "Sorry, Your Grace," he said finally, his voice trembling. "I didn't see her leave." Course he didn't, because no one had. That was the problem. The Duke said nothing more. He turned away abruptly, dismissing the servant without another word. His mind was already moving ahead, piecing together possibilities, rejecting them just as quickly. She hadn't spoken to anyone. Hadn't lingered. Hadn't drawn attention beyond what could be dismissed as curiosity. Which meant she had planned this. The thought settled in slowly, but once it did, it refused to leave. This had not been an accident, not a coincidence. She had come here knowing she would disappear, and somehow that made her even more dangerous. He moved again, faster now, through the ballroom, cutting between guests who quickly stepped aside, sensing something in his demeanor they did not dare question. Whispers followed him. "What's wrong? Why does he look like that? Did something happen?" But he ignored them. None of it mattered. Only one thing did, finding her. He reached the edge of the ballroom, where tall doors stood open, leading out into the gardens. The cool night air drifted in, carrying the faint scent of roses and damp earth. If she had left, this was the most likely path. Without hesitation, he stepped outside. The gardens were quieter, darker. Lanterns lined the pathways, casting soft pools of golden light that barely touched the shadows between the hedges. The sound of the ball faded behind him, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of a fountain. He scanned the area, every path, every corner, every hidden space where someone might linger. Nothing, no movement, no trace, only silence. He walked deeper into the garden, his steps steady but firm, his gaze sharp as ever. He passed couples whispering in the shadows, nobles seeking privacy away from the crowded ballroom. They paused as he approached, their conversations dying instantly under the weight of his presence. But none of them were her. He stopped near the fountain. The water flowed steadily, uninterrupted, as though nothing had changed. But everything had. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. She had been here, she had to have been. And yet, it was as if the night itself had swallowed her whole. A cold realization began to form. Not frustration, not yet, something deeper, something sharper. Because this was no longer just about her absence. It was about what her absence meant. She had slipped through a room filled with the most observant, calculating people in the kingdom, and not one of them had noticed. Not one. Not even him. His jaw tightened. That was unacceptable. He turned back toward the palace, his mind already shifting into something colder, more controlled. This was no longer a search driven by curiosity. It was a pursuit, and he would not fail. He re-entered the ballroom, the noise and light crashing over him once again. But this time everything felt different, the grandeur, the elegance, the carefully constructed world of appearances. It all felt hollow, because something real had been there, something unpredictable, and now it is gone. He moved through the room again, this time with purpose that could not be mistaken. He stopped guests one by one. You saw her. Wasn't a question, descriptions followed, vague, useless. Woman in blue. A mask. She danced with you, your grace. No one knew more than that, no name, no origin, no detail that mattered. Each answer only deepened the silence around her disappearance. Each failure sharpened the edge of his focus, until finally he stopped in the center of the ballroom, still, composed, but no longer untouched. Because beneath that calm exterior, something had shifted permanently. He understood it now. This was not a chance. This was not an oversight. This was my intention. She had come into his world, stood before him, danced with him, and then vanished without a trace, as if she had never existed. But she had. He knew she had, because he could still feel it, the echo of her presence, the memory of her voice, the weight of her hand in his. And that was something he could not ignore, would not ignore. The room continued around him, unaware that something irreversible had just begun. Because for everyone else, the night was ending. But for the Duke, it had only just begun. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the crowd one final time. And in that moment, a decision was made, silent, absolute, unbreakable. He would find her, no matter how well she had hidden, no matter how carefully she had planned her disappearance, no matter how deep into the shadows she had gone, because she had made one mistake, one critical mistake. She had let him see her. And now, there was no escaping what came next, because the Duke of Blackwood was not a man who forgot, not a man who gave up. Not a man who accepted mystery without tearing it apart piece by piece. And somewhere out there she was still breathing, still hiding, still believing she had slipped away unnoticed. But she hadn't, not truly. Because even without a name, without a trace, without a single clue to follow, she had already left something behind, something far more dangerous than evidence, his attention. And once she had that, there was no disappearing, not really. Because now he would search every hall, every street, every secret corner of the kingdom, until the mystery unraveled, until the truth stood before him, until she stood before him. Again. And when that moment came, there would be no vanishing, no escape, no second disappearance into the shadows, only answers, only the truth, only her. The next morning, the palace buzzed with rumors. By the time the sun had risen over the horizon, the gossip had already spread like wildfire, weaving its way through the corridors, climbing the grand staircases, and finding its way into every corner of the royal estate. Whispers of a mystery woman, of the Duke's strange behavior, of his obsessive search through the halls. Servants and courtiers exchanged glances, some half afraid, some half amused, as the ball's aftermath began to take shape. But the Duke wasn't listening. He wasn't interested in rumors, in idle chatter, in the opinions of those who didn't understand what had happened. What had changed ***. He stood alone in his study, a room filled with maps, books, and intricate scrolls, symbols of his power, his control. The flickering light of the hearth cast long shadows on the walls, but it wasn't the fire that burned in his chest. It was her, the woman, the mystery. The ghost who had slipped through his fingers. His eyes, once so sharp and steady, now seemed clouded with something else, something dark. His fists clenched, tightening around the edges of the papers before him, but his mind was somewhere far away. Somewhere outside the walls of the palace. Somewhere in the shadows where she had disappeared, leaving only the echo of her presence behind. He wasn't concerned with the rumors. They were distractions, unimportant noise. The truth was simple, and it had already settled into him like a weight that couldn't be ignored. He needed to find her. He would find her. And so, the moment the first light of dawn had touched the kingdom, the Duke gave one command, ***, find her. ***, it was not a request. It was not an order meant for negotiation. It was a declaration, a promise, a certainty that would shape every moment from that point forward. Servants were questioned, their answers vague, clouded by confusion. They had seen the woman, yes, but none could place her identity. None could confirm where she had gone once the music had stopped, once the dancers had dispersed. Guards were summoned, one by one, each one interrogated in turn. They had seen many guests leave the ballroom, of course, but none remembered her departure. They had all assumed she had simply mingled with the crowd, disappeared into the night like everyone else. ***, nothing. Not a single trace of her presence beyond the brief time they had shared on the dance floor. It was as if she had never been there at all. The Duke's frustration only deepened with every failure, every dead end. He moved from room to room, searching for answers in the places no one else thought to look: old archives, dusty records, forgotten servant logs. The guest lists were reviewed over and over again, each name dissected, cross-referenced, re-examined. But there was no mention of her. No record of the woman who had danced with him, whose presence had captivated him with such force. Nothing. There was no trace of her name, no reference to her in any royal ledger, no mention of her in any conversation. It was as if she had existed for only a brief moment, only to slip into the ether when he had least expected it. And as the days turned into weeks, the Duke's search only grew darker, because this was no longer about curiosity. Curiosity had a limit. This was obsession. It crept in like a silent tide, slowly overwhelming everything else. His mornings were spent combing through the palace, questioning every servant, every guard, every noble. His nights were spent staring at the ceiling of his chambers, haunted by the memory of her. A shadow, a whisper, a phantom presence that danced just beyond his reach. His mind was consumed with the need to understand. To possess the answers. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why had she come to the ball? Why had she left without a trace? And most importantly, why did she feel so familiar? The questions circled endlessly, wrapping themselves around him like chains. The deeper he searched, the more the answers eluded him. The more the mystery pressed in on him from all sides. It became an itch he could never scratch, a hunger that could never be sated. He found himself at night, alone in his study, his hands trembling as they went through page after page of records. Lists of noble houses, visitors from distant lands, guests who had attended past royal events. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let go. His every waking moment was spent in pursuit of the one thing that had come to dominate his thoughts. The woman in midnight blue, her mask, her eyes, the way she had moved. And now, the way she had disappeared, he couldn't understand it. How could something so fleeting, so impermanent, so intangible come to have such a hold on him? It wasn't just the mystery anymore. It was her presence, the way it had pulled at him with an intensity that defied reason. The way she had felt, different from every other woman he had ever known. He had been with women of power, of grace, of beauty. Women who had known how to play the game of courtship, who had known the right words, the right gestures, the right smiles. But she had not played. She had simply existed. And that, more than anything, had drawn him in. Days bled into weeks, but there was no change. His search only deepened the obsession. He began asking questions in places he would have once avoided. The homes of distant courtiers, the alleyways where the lowborn lived, places where rumors were born, but also where truths hid in shadow. He sent his most trusted men into corners of the kingdom where no one of importance ever dared to tread. But still, the answers were the same. Nothing. No one knew her name. No one had seen her before. No one had any information about the woman in midnight blue. It became a puzzle. And the more pieces he tried to fit together, the more the image of her eluded him. It was maddening. And it wasn't just the mystery of her presence that consumed him. It was the fact that she had chosen him chosen to dance with him, to share that brief, fleeting moment. She had been surrounded by nobles of equal or greater status, yet she had sought him out. Had looked into his eyes as though she knew something he did not, as though she had seen something in him that no one else could. And that, too, was a question that haunted him. The Duke was not accustomed to being out of control. He prided himself on his ability to manage everything. His affairs, his titles, his people, his emotions. He had never been shaken by another person. Never had he been affected by the fleeting whims of others. But this woman, she had touched something deep within him. And it frightened him. It was a feeling he didn't know how to handle. And so he searched harder, with more intensity, more determination. His obsession grew. It consumed him until every corner of his life was touched by it. The royal court, once a place of power and political maneuvering, became a backdrop to his singular pursuit. He spoke to his closest allies, calling in favors, digging deeper. He questioned informants and spies. He sent out letters to distant lands, hoping that someone somewhere would have information on a woman who had vanished without a trace. But still, nothing. By now, his search had become the talk of the palace. Nobles who had once adored him began to whisper behind his back. The servants spoke of his sleepless nights, of his absent-mindedness during royal meetings. They spoke of the way he would abruptly leave rooms, searching for clues that didn't exist. They noticed the way his gaze lingered in empty spaces, as though he were waiting for her to reappear, as though he expected her to simply walk through the door and end the madness. But she never did. And the Duke, he was beginning to crack, days stretched into endless hours, filled with futile searches and unanswered questions. Every trace of the woman slipped further away. Every new lead felt like a cruel joke, another dead end. He could feel himself growing weaker, more desperate. He had once been a man of reason, but now reason was slipping through his fingers, replaced by something far darker. He wasn't just seeking answers anymore, he was chasing a ghost. And the longer he chased, the more he realized that he had already lost. But he could not stop, because "I have to stop now" would mean admitting defeat, and defeat was something the Duke of Blackwood would never accept. Not now, not ever. Far from the palace, hidden in a quiet part of the city, the world felt different. There were no chandeliers here, no polished marble floors reflecting candlelight, no orchestras filling the air with elegant melodies, no carefully crafted smiles hiding dangerous intentions. Here, the streets were narrow, uneven, alive in a completely different way. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp stone. Lanterns hung loosely from crooked posts, their dim glow flickering against worn-out walls. Footsteps echoed not with grace, but with survival, hurried, cautious, deliberate. And in the middle of it all she walked, alone, her gown, once a symbol of quiet elegance, now brushed against dirt and shadow. The deep midnight blue that had captured attention in the ballroom now blended into the darkness of the streets, almost as if it had been chosen for this very escape. She did not rush, but she did not linger either. Every step was calculated, every turn intentional. She knew these streets. Knew which paths remained quiet, knew where eyes would not follow, because this was not her first time moving unseen. This was survival. Finally, she reached it. A small house, tucked between two aging buildings that leaned toward each other like conspirators guarding a secret. It was easy to miss, easy to ignore. And that was exactly why it was perfect. She paused at the door for just a moment. Her hand hovered near the handle, her breath catching slightly, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something heavier. Then she pushed it open. Inside, the silence wrapped around her instantly. No music, no whispers, no watchful eyes, just stillness. She stepped in and closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. For the first time since leaving the palace, she allowed herself to breathe. A slow, unsteady breath that revealed what she had hidden so perfectly all night. Her composure began to crack, not completely, but enough. Her hands, which had remained steady through every glance, every step, every word spoken to the most powerful man in the kingdom. Now I trembled, slightly at first, then more visibly. She lifted them slowly, as though unsure of what she would find when she looked down. And then she reached for the mask, the delicate piece that had hidden her identity, protected her, allowed her to exist in a world she did not belong to. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers resting lightly against its edge. Because removing it meant facing the truth, and the truth was not kind. Still, she had no choice. Slowly, carefully, she pulled it away. The mask slipped free, revealing her face to the quiet room. There was no audience now. No one admires her. No one to question her. No one could see the storm behind her eyes, only her. And the truth she could no longer hide. She placed the mask down on a nearby table, her gaze lingering on it for longer than necessary. It looked harmless now, just an object. Just a piece of art, but she knew better, because that mask had allowed her to step into a world that could destroy her. And worse, a world that could destroy him. Her hands dropped slowly to her sides, but the trembling did not stop. If anything, it grew worse, because now there was nothing left to hold it back. Her shoulders sank slightly, the weight of the night finally settling onto her. And with it, the truth. She knew who he was, of course she did. Everyone did. The Duke of Blackwood, a man whose name carried power, whose presence commanded silence, whose decisions shaped the lives of countless people. He was not just a noble, he was a force, and she had stood before him. I spoke to him, danced with him, looked into his eyes as though she had the right. A soft, shaky breath escaped her lips, because that was the part that terrified her the most. Not the ball, not the risk, not even the way she had disappeared without a trace. No, it was what had happened in that moment between them. The connection, the stillness. The way everything else had faded, that had not been part of the plan, and she knew it. She turned away from the table, packing slowly across the small room. Her steps were uneven now, not like before, not controlled, not composed, because the truth was catching up to her. And it was relentless if the Duke found her. Her chest tightened at the thought, not just found her, recognized her. Understood who she truly was, everything would fall apart. Her life gone, destroyed in an instant. Not because of something she had done tonight, but because of something far older, far deeper. A truth she had spent years hiding. A truth that had forced her into the shadows long before she ever stepped into that ballroom. She stopped suddenly, her hand pressing lightly against the wall as if to steady herself, because the thought refused to leave. If he found her, it wouldn't just ruin her life. Her eyes closed briefly. And in that darkness, the image of his face appeared again, calm, controlled, unshaken. A man who did not tolerate betrayal. A man who did not forgive deception. A man who would tear apart the world to uncover the truth. Her voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. It could destroy him. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Because this was not just her secret. It was his, too, even if he didn't know it yet. She pulled away from the wall, her breathing uneven now, her mind racing through possibilities, through outcomes she could not escape, if the truth came out. It wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be devastating for both of them, because she was not just a stranger, not just a mysterious woman at a ball, not just a fleeting presence in his night. No, she was something far more dangerous, something far more complicated, something that should never have crossed his path. Her gaze drifted back to the mask, sitting there, silent, innocent, but carrying the weight of everything. That was a mistake, she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Because part of her, a part she did not want to acknowledge, I did not regret it, the dance, the moment, the way he had looked at her, as though she was not invisible, as though she was not hiding, as though she mattered. That was the danger, not the palace, not the people, not even the risk of being discovered. The real danger, it was him. And what he made her feel. She moved toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out into the quiet street. The city moved on, unaware of the storm that had begun, unaware of the search that was already unfolding, unaware of the man who would not stop until he found her. Her grip on the curtain tightened slightly, because she knew him now, or at least she knew enough. He would not forget, he would not move on, he would not let this go. And when he finally found her, because he would, there would be no escaping what came next. Her reflection stared back at her faintly in the glass, no mask, no disguise, just her. And the truth she could no longer outrun. A slow breath left her lips unsteady, heavy, because now it was no longer a question of if, only when would he find her, when would the truth surface, when would everything she had built come crashing down. Her eyes hardened slightly, not with fear, but with something else, something stronger, resolve. Because if that moment came, she would not be the same woman who stood in that ballroom. She would not be calm, not unbothered, not untouched. She would be ready, she had to be. Because she wasn't just a mystery. She wasn't just a woman in a midnight gown. She wasn't just a fleeting shadow in his world. She was something far more dangerous, far more powerful, far more devastating than anyone could imagine. She was a secret. And not just any secret, a scandal waiting to happen, one that could shake the very foundation of everything he believed, everything he controlled, everything he was. And when that truth finally came to light, there would be no winners, only consequences. Only destruction, only the undeniable reality of some secrets were never meant to be found. Back at the palace, the air had changed. What was once a place of elegance and order now carried something heavier, something unseen but deeply felt. The grand halls still stood tall, untouched by the chaos beneath the surface. Chandeliers still glowed. Servants still moved quietly through corridors. Nobles still whispered behind fans and polished smiles. But beneath it all something had shifted, because the Duke of Blackwood had not stopped searching. And when a man like him refused to stop, the entire palace felt it. Days had turned into weeks, yet his presence had only grown colder, more focused, more dangerous. He no longer entertained idle conversation, no longer attended gatherings with interest, no longer acknowledged the trivial distractions of court life. Everything had narrowed to one purpose, her, the woman who had no name, the ghost who had slipped through his grasp, the one mystery he could not solve. Until now, it began quietly, as all dangerous things do. Not with a grand discovery, not with undeniable proof, but with something far more subtle, a detail small, almost meaningless to anyone else. But to him it was everything. The Duke stood in his study, the dim light of evening casting long shadows across the walls. Papers were scattered across his desk, records, reports, statements from servants and guards, fragments of a search that had yielded nothing, until this moment. A knock came at the door, sharp, careful, measured. Enter. The word was calm, controlled. Beneath it, something stirred. The door opened slowly, and one of his most trusted men stepped inside. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he approached the desk with a quiet urgency, holding a single folded document in his hand. That alone was enough to shift the air, because nothing had been brought to him like this before, not during this search, not with this level of certainty. "My lord," the man said quietly, "we found something." Duke did not respond right away. He simply looked at the paper. Then at the man, then back at the paper. "Speak." "It's not much," the man admitted. "But it's different." That word alone held weight now, because everything before had been nothing but empty guesses and useless speculation. But this was something. The paper was placed gently on the desk. The Duke's gaze dropped to it slowly, deliberately. His fingers moved, not hurried, not uncertain, but with the quiet precision of a man who understood the importance of what he was about to uncover. He unfolded it and read. At first, there was nothing, just words, simple, unremarkable. But then his eyes stopped, the silence in the room deepened. His expression did not change immediately. But something beneath it did, a flicker, dark, sharp, alive. The man across from him noticed it instantly. Because the Duke did not react, he never reacted. But this was different. The room seemed to hold its breath. Seconds passed, then longer, until finally, the Duke exhaled slowly, not in relief, not in frustration, but in realization. His grip on the paper tightened slightly, not enough to crease it, but enough to reveal something had shifted, because this was not just information, this was a crack, a break in the silence that had surrounded her, a single thread leading somewhere real. His eyes darkened, not with anger, not yet, but with something far more dangerous, understanding. "So," voice was quiet, lower than before, controlled in a way that made it heavier. "This is who you are." Words hung in the air, thick with implication, not a question, not a guess. Conclusion, something had clicked, something had fallen into place. The man standing before him shifted slightly, uncertain whether to speak again. He had seen the Duke in many states, calm, calculating, even ruthless, but this was something else entirely. "What do you want us to do, my lord?" he asked carefully. For a moment, the Duke said nothing. He simply stared at the paper, at the detail, at the single clue that had changed everything. Then slowly, he stood. The movement was deliberate, measured. But there was something in it that had not been there before, something final, something inevitable. The chair behind him shifted slightly as he rose, the faint sound echoing louder than it should have in the silence of the room. He placed the paper down gently, too gently, as though it carried more weight than it should. His gaze lifted, not toward the man, but beyond him, as if he could already see her, somewhere out there. Still hiding, still believing she was safe, still believing she had disappeared, but she hadn't, not anymore, because now he had something, not everything, but enough to begin, enough to follow, enough to find her. His voice came again, calm but unyielding. "No one else is to know." Man nodded immediately. "Yes, my lord. This does not leave this room." Duke stepped forward slowly, his mind already moving ahead, constructing paths, anticipating outcomes, dismantling every possible escape she might attempt. Because now, it was no longer a blind search, it was a hunt. And he was no longer looking for a mystery. He was looking for a person, a real one, with a past, with connections, with something to lose. His eyes narrowed slightly. Because that meant something else. She could be found, easily, inevitably. The thought settled into him with a quiet certainty. He walked toward the window, stopping just short of it. The night stretched out before him, vast and silent, the city beyond the palace walls unaware of the storm that had just begun to take shape. Lights flickered in the distance. Lives moved on unaware. But not for long. His reflection stared back at him faintly in the glass, composed, controlled, but no longer untouched, because something had changed, not just in the search, but in him. This was no longer about curiosity. No longer about unanswered questions. No longer about a fleeting moment at a royal ball. This was something deeper, something darker, something that had rooted itself within him and refused to let go. Because now, he knew not everything, but enough to understand one thing clearly. She had not been random. She had not been insignificant. She had not been just another woman passing through his world. No, she had been placed there, by fate, by design, or by something far more dangerous. And now, he would uncover it, no matter what it cost. His voice broke the silence one final time, soft but absolute. "You can hide from the world." A pause, not for effect, but because the truth of the words needed no embellishment. "But not from me." Was no anger in it, no raised tone, no dramatic emphasis, just certainty, cold, unshakable certainty. Because the Duke of Blackwood did not make empty declarations. When he said something, it became reality. Behind him, the man stood still, understanding without needing further explanation. The search was changing, the stakes were rising, and whatever came next would not be quiet. The Duke remained at the window, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. Somewhere out there she was still hiding, still breathing, still unaware that the one thing she had tried to avoid was already closing in on her. And this time, there would be no vanishing, no disappearing into shadows, no slipping through unnoticed, because now he was no longer searching blindly. He was coming for her, and when he finally found her, because he would, the truth would come with him, relentless, unforgiving, unstoppable. The night stretched on, silent and unaware. But beneath that silence, a storm had begun, and it would not end quietly. And somewhere in the shadows, she realized. Her breath caught in her throat as the soft night air wrapped around her, filling her lungs with the coolness of the evening. The street was quiet, too quiet if she was being honest. She had always found solace in silence, but now it felt suffocating. A distant echo of footsteps drifted through the narrow alleyway, but she didn't look back. She didn't need to, she already knew that somewhere someone was watching. No, he was watching. The Duke. The man who had haunted her thoughts, her dreams, her every waking moment since that fateful night at the royal ball. The man who had looked at her with those dark, penetrating eyes, as if he had seen straight through the mask she had carefully placed to shield herself. The man who had danced with her, as though their brief encounter had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of grace. But she knew better now. It had never been just a dance. It had never been just a chance meeting. The Duke of Blackwood didn't do things by accident. He didn't chase shadows without purpose. And he didn't leave things unfinished. Her steps faltered as the weight of the truth sank in. For weeks, she had moved through the streets of the city, hiding in plain sight, blending into the crowd, pretending that she was just another face in the city's sea of souls. She had worn the mask, played the part, and convinced herself that she could slip into the cracks of society without being noticed. But the moment she danced with him, the moment their hands had brushed, the moment their eyes had met, something had shifted, something had changed, and now she could feel it. The air felt different. The very shadows that had once offered her safety now felt claustrophobic, closing in on her from all sides. Her mind raced, but there was no escape from the growing reality. He was close. Too close. She didn't know how he had found her. Maybe it was a detail she had missed. A single crack in her carefully constructed facade. Or perhaps it had been fate, but she knew one thing for certain. The man who ruled over Blackwood, who commanded kingdoms with a mere word, was no longer just a distant figure. He was coming for her, and she had no idea how to stop him. The sound of footsteps grew louder just behind her. Her heart skipped a beat and her instincts screamed at her to move, to run. But she didn't. She couldn't. There was nowhere left to hide, he knew. She had spent so long running from the truth, running from her past, running from the secrets she had buried deep within her soul. But now all of it was coming back. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling piece by piece, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her fingers gripped the edge of the building as she steadied herself. Her pulse raced. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she forced herself to stay calm. To not show fear, but her mind was a storm. A whirlpool of panic and confusion. She could feel the pressure rising in her chest, the crushing weight of everything she had tried so hard to escape. How had she let this happen? Why had she let him in? But there it was again. The same dark pull, the same unspoken connection she had felt that night. The undeniable tension between them. The way he had looked at her, like she was something he needed to understand. Something he couldn't leave alone. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath, trying to find some semblance of calm. But it was too late. She could feel it, the weight of his presence, his shadow, the Duke. He was getting closer. She felt it in her bones. The slow, deliberate step that echoed through the empty street. The way the air shifted. The way the world seemed to still, as though holding its breath. And with that silence came the realization that had been haunting her for days. She couldn't outrun him. She couldn't hide from him. The most dangerous man in the kingdom was finally getting closer. The footsteps stopped behind her, and for a long moment everything was still. A perfect silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of her shallow breaths. She knew he was there. She didn't need to turn around to confirm it. He was standing there. Close. Watching. Waiting. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape into the dark, to flee into the streets and disappear into the maze of the city. But her legs refused to move. Her body refused to listen. And then a voice, low, cold, certain. You thought you could hide. The words sent a shiver down her spine, but they were what terrified her the most. What terrified her was the understanding in his voice. The way he knew she had been hiding, and now he was here. He had come for her, and no matter how much she wanted to escape, no matter how much she wished to run away, she knew she couldn't, because the Duke wasn't just a man, he was a force. And that force had found her. She turned slowly, the movement deliberate, as though she could somehow slow the inevitable, as though she could hold onto the last thread of control. And there he was, the Duke of Blackwood. His presence filled the alleyway, the darkness around him seeming to bend and shift, wrapping him in an almost otherworldly aura. His eyes were cold, dark, and unwavering. He stood still, but the air around him seemed to vibrate with the power he held. And then those eyes met hers. And for a moment, everything stopped. The world, the shadows, the city, everything else fell away. It was just him, just her, the two of them, and she could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity of it. It was no longer a curiosity, no longer a mystery. It was something darker, something undeniable. I warned you. His voice was low, a whisper against the night. His words were no longer a question, they were a statement, a declaration. You can't hide from me. His presence was suffocating now. She could feel the air pressing in on her, closing the space between them. The tension between them palpable, thick. It was as though the very ground beneath her feet was shifting. I wasn't hiding, she said, her voice betraying none of the panic that threatened to rise in her chest. She tried to remain steady, to hold her ground, but her body was trembling. And she knew that if he wanted to take her, if he wanted to rip apart the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself, he could. The Duke of Blackwood didn't ask questions. He owned it. And at this moment she felt it. She felt the weight of everything she had tried to outrun. But this time there was no escape. His gaze hardened. I know you better than you think. She swallowed hard. And with that she understood. The dance they had shared, the fleeting connection that had sparked between them, none of it had been coincidence. Not for him. For him, it had been the beginning of something much darker, something inevitable. His eyes narrowed. You can hide from the world, but not from me. In that moment, she knew this was just the beginning, and somewhere in the shadows she realized the truth. The most dangerous man in the kingdom was finally getting closer. There was no more hiding, no more escaping. He had found her, and this time nothing would stop him. If you, like this and still want to be LISDNING, 2 such interesting royal stories on the channel, dark royal stories, don't forget to like, share, comment, and most immediately subscribe to my channel, and click the bell for more update.